Good morning, good afternoon. It's so great to see you here. My name is Maika Leibbrandt. I'll be your host for our entire learning series. This is a day that we've been looking forward to, I want to say logistically for a year since we wrapped it up in 2019. But I think on the whole, we've been looking forward to this for a whole lot longer. I think about those conversations I had early in my career at Gallup, more than a decade ago now, where we had this tiny little seed of an idea of what would it be like if we could get a whole bunch of people together around this common mission to truly take this idea of CliftonStrengths and move it towards something that makes a difference, not just an idea, but really, I think an ignition, a moment to really drive from potential to performance, as we like to say. So you are here, part of a global network of Clifton Strengths coaches who care about this and who practice this. And we're so excited that you're here. Just to test our sound here in the chat, I'd love to know if you can hear us. And I'm not going to type that in the chat because that is my own little trick of how to test sound. If you can hear me, tell me where it is you are joining from. Hi, Connie in O'Neill, Nebraska. Tomoyuki in Japan. And Jeff, my neighbor here in Virginia Beach. Jeff, I do owe you a reply to that message you sent me on LinkedIn. And yes, we should get coffee. We've got Rome, Georgia, Kansas City, Larry in Lincoln, Stephanie in Boston, Joburg, South Africa. We're here in Sydney, Australia. Nicole, Jim is here. He's just behind the scenes. Omaha, Poland, Philly, Singapore, Duluth. This is fantastic. Maradi is joining us from Cyprus. I didn't read those all out just because it was fun. I hope you really hear the power of a global strengths community and how great it is that we can all be here together. We're going to get started with session one here in just a moment. But before I bring in our fantastic guest today, I do want to just do a few housekeeping notes. If you've never joined us before, thank you for being here. I think really ways to make the most of our entire learning series is a couple things that I would suggest. One, you should have the participant guide. So that came to you through a link. I will drop that link to it again in the chat. But our chat, as you've noticed probably already, is moving quite quickly. So make sure that you've got that participant guide. It's really designed to be used as a writable PDF or as something you print off and write on. You can take a look in that participant guide at the spectacular lineup that we have coming for you. So you note that today we're spending some time with Anna Sawyer, but throughout the rest of the week, we're going to do everything Clifton Strengths, from getting real nitty gritty around the data and the science behind it, to talking about the Gallup Access platform and really thinking about, even beyond Gallup Access, how that platform can help you navigate your experience with your clients. We've also got some live coaching experiences. That is hands down what you ask for the most, or I guess the most frequently asked learning experience is just, can we hear somebody live coaching? So we've got two of Gallup's fantastic coaches who are MCC level certified with ICF. You'll get to hear them coaching some folks this week. You've also got a review of our tools. It's going to be a fantastic week, and you can use that participant guide to not have to put so much pressure on your own brain to remember all the great things that you're learning. If I were you, I would say, jot down absolutely anything as messy as possible in the moment that it's happening in that participant guide. And then ideally block off some time on your calendar next week to go back and really make sense of those notes. Real development isn't about attending a learning series or taking a course or getting a certification. It is about purposefully making sense of the experience that you're having. So today we've got this meaningful shared experience together, but we hope that in the future you pull on whatever themes that speak to you most strategically or most critically to really review this. The other thing that you may not have thought about, especially perhaps if you don't lead with relationship building themes, is reach out to somebody else who's also experiencing this. My good friend Caroline and I took a ride together this morning on our cycles from our own houses. She's a certified coach joining from Atlanta. And she sent me a text saying, "Hey, I can't be here today, but I'm definitely joining on Wednesday. Let's take some notes together." You can reach out to find a a co-collaborator or another Clifton Strengths coach who's also gathering the same information in real time. If you don't know one, check out our certified coaches group on Facebook or on LinkedIn. You can search for Gallup trained coaches there. Really think about how you could make this a great experience. If you're hosting a watch party with other people to really network and make the most of this together, and think about not just the links between our experts and you, but also the links between you and other Clifton Strengths coaches. If you're hosting a watch party, take some pictures, send them over to us at coaching@gallup.com. We'd love to see those and share them and really make this not just a one-way sort of street, but a strong network of people who are discovering and challenging and changing for the better. We will have a little bit more housekeeping toward the end of our session this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're joining from. But right now, I want to get into what we're really talking about today. So we're joined by one of my very dear friends and absolutely who I hold in highest regard when it comes to helping people take Clifton Strengths from an idea and translate it into an action, into something you can really do. Today's guest is a leader here at Gallup who partners with coaches all over Europe. And if you think about that idea of expanding a great network, not just from the tool to the recipient, but also to the people who are linking arms around us and thinking about those connections there that really make a difference. Our guest today has certainly accomplished that and continues to challenge our ability to expand the strength of that network. She leads with competition, maximizer, communication, activator, and achiever. And her maximizer, I think, is perhaps what has continued to inspire coaches all around the world, outside of even just her direct influence in Europe, to build upon each other's insights and consistently do more with greater excellence. And that matters because it ultimately benefits our clients. It benefits the organizations that they work with. We have a lot to learn from her. Often people ask, what's the next level with Clifton Strengths? And today, Anna Sawyer has experienced that breakthrough in development and improvement specific to expanding the conversation beyond top 5 and into the power and discovery that happens when you look at a full 34 profile. You might have noticed that this is a strategic direction in line with Gallup overall, but it's not just a goal in thinking, how can we get this into the hands of more people? It really does come from an understanding of development and understanding of coaching, where we've learned that this is something worth looking into. Anna is here today to help us think about what it looks like to consider the entire 34 and what that means for coaches and clients alike. Anna, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So I want to start out just by getting to know you a little bit. Anna, I rattled off your top 5, but when you introduce yourself through your strengths, what things do you hope that we notice?
Gosh, I think probably I'd start by saying I just believe massively in the power of strengths. And I don't think that any of the people that I kind of explore strengths development or strengths coaching with are kind of, I don't think it's different for them. I think we all kind of instinctively understand that there's just more of us when we are, leveraging our strengths with intention. So I think belief shows through pretty heavily for me. And just this really sort of excitement about how do we translate or how do we really move that number. One of the things that I find really, I suppose, of my career with Gallup is watching that engagement number. And, when we look at that around the world, you can see it's sort of pretty level at about 15% of the global workforce are engaged. And I just think there's this incredible energy that comes from exploring strengths that can really help change that. I'm a mum, and I think my biggest hope is that for my children, they get the opportunity to explore careers that are fulfilling, engaging, that they just get to do what they love to do. And I think really that's a lot of our hope, is not just for our own families, but for everybody, that they find out what's the great fit for them.
I love this because it's like I don't even have to ask you the question. I could just say, go, Anna, talk about this. I want to focus specifically on utilizing full 34 or Clifton Strengths 34. What difference have you noticed in going beyond top 5?
Yeah, great question. So I think when I think about the top five, it's a great place to start. And I think for lots of people, I think context matters. So if this is the first opportunity that people have to start exploring what's right about them, five can be a fantastic place to start. And obviously, those are really important. And still, that core philosophy about do more of what you have the potential to be world class at is still our sort of overriding philosophy. I think what's also really interesting, though, is that when you think about that five, it is somewhat of an arbitrary cutoff. So we know that there is a lot of different in sort of intensity within that. So what are dominant strengths for one person, can differ quite substantially for another. So I think it's really important to kind of look. My preference is always top 10. I think it gives us an opportunity to go a little deeper and to think about, the best five as much as the top five. And instinctively, I think some people will perhaps that there's a sort of almost a face validity when you're exploring strengths. If there is an expectation that something's going to show up and it's not there, that can potentially cause a barrier with somebody before they sort of get into really the conversation. So I think for me, it's certainly a preference to work with the fuller report.
So I'm thinking back to my first experience with CliftonStrengths circa 2003. And top five felt sacred. It felt like this is what we mean that we're doing when we're focusing on strengths. Is it possible to still be strengths based if you're looking at 34?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great question. So I'm going to quote she's kind of like my strengths Jedi, Gwen Elliott. So many of you will have come across her. And, one of the things that she always says is that when you think about your top five, they're kind of like your dominant hand. So if you think about you're walking along and you trip over, if you're going to trip over, you're immediately going to put your dominant hand out to save you. But the other hand can be really helpful in stopping you grazing your chin as well. So it's kind of one of those things where the two of them in combination are really powerful. And I think just to sort of add a bit of sort of finesse around that, it's that dexterity that working with that fuller profile gives you. So can I be functional with one hand? Absolutely. If I've got both, I can do a much better job. So I think it's that sort of the sum of what you can accomplish with that fuller perspective.
I love that. When you think about a dominant hand, I hadn't heard the piece around if you're going to trip, you're going to put that hand out first. How does that translate into some coaching conversations? What does this really look like beyond just convincing somebody, okay, I'll go for 34? Once they've done that, what do you do with that full 34?
So I think first of all, I mean, a great starting point is always were there any surprises? Were there things that you were expecting to see that you didn't see, or were there things that showed up there that you weren't expecting to see? So I think that's a great, and I'm sure lots of coaches do that anyway. It's just a great discovery place for a lot of people. I think the other piece is as well is as we look at that full 34 report, it's great to also be looking at that bottom piece. So Maika, I've shared with you before, one of the phrases that I love to kind of share is positive vulnerability. So it's that piece around being able to explore the things that I love to do and I'm instinctively going to be energized and excited about, and some of the things that I'm not going to love to do so much are going to be harder for me to do. So it's that piece around, it's great to be who I am, but it's also okay to be who I'm not. And really having that sort of full report allows me to explore that.
Positive vulnerability might be worth the price of admission. How do you bring that up with somebody?
Yeah, so I think it's just that piece around being open about who you are and who you're not. I think the way that I often explore this is around first of all, the language of strengths is fundamentally positive. It's an objective language framework seated in positivity that helps us to articulate those things that we do and we don't do. So really. helping people to just get comfortable with talking about those is incredibly valuable. And I think the next sort of step from that is then getting comfortable sharing that. So having conversations with others about who you are and who you're not. And I think once you start to do that, the kind of natural evolution is that we start to share. So that positive vulnerability is not just about putting myself out there, but giving people permission to do that as well. So the applications in terms of, me as an individual, how I perform, how I connect with my line manager in a conversation about performance, how I connect with my customers. That's my big hot button, is sort of leveraging strengths in that customer context as well, as well as within teams, which I think a lot of us are already exploring. How do we create strengths-based teams?
Now, does who I'm not, does that come just from number 34, or is there a different way to look at that full profile to get that kind of answer?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the great exercises that I keep going back to is this sorting exercise. So, on the accelerated program, we all learned about, you take your full 34 report, you read down from the top until it stops describing you all the time, and then reading up from the bottom and still until it starts to describe you sometimes. I still think that's a really fantastic exercise, to just get us thinking kind of in big handfuls about, dominant, supporting, and lesser strengths. But I think and I think, of course, when we talk about strengths-based development, we're talking about return on investment. Where are you likely to get the biggest investment in terms of any developmental effort? It's going to be in the things that are in the upper part of your profile, for sure. But I also think it's about, helping again to have people explore strategies to think about, well, how am I managing those areas that, I might be required to do, but also that that come less naturally to me. And it's not just about saying, oh, well, I'm no good at this, therefore, I palm it off to somebody else, or, it's about sort of thinking creatively about, well, how might I deliver that outcome through leveraging something that I've got, as well as potentially thinking about strategies like collaborating with others. So I don't think, I think there's lots of ways that you can potentially explore coaching around that.
I really like what you said. It's not just what am I not going to do, but how can we talk about the outcome
Right.
and look at what I've got? I'm reminded of I think it's a video in the accelerated coaching course, when we're talking about how do you coach people who might be lacking certain domains.
Mm.
And one of the coaches says, they look at the bottom. What do we do when they look at the bottom? We always say, okay, what is it that makes you think you need to do that? And then look up at maybe those top 10 and say, how might you get there instead? It
Right.
sounds like you're talking about expanding that conversation even farther to say there might be some legitimate drainers of your energy. What other things can you look at except for just yourself?
Yeah.
Probably 101 level of coaching is, what do you have, instead that'll help you get there? Maybe
Mhm.
the 201 level is, what kind of support systems are going to work for you? What kind
Yeah.
of collaboration is going to work for you? What can you
Yeah.
raise your hand within a team, as you mentioned, and say, hey guys, don't expect me to do XYZ with
Right.
excellence or with a lot of energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's spot on. I mean, I think one of the interesting things is about reframing uh, sort of outcomes that you need to achieve through the lens of things that are naturally going to excite you. So, for example,
Mm.
as my poor colleagues will tell you, I'm horrible at anything admin related. I just, low discipline, don't, it's just not exciting. However, if I reframe some of those activities in the context of the people around me, i.e., if I don't do this, this has a negative impact on my friends and colleagues, that's an energizer for me. So I can reframe that through, the lens of something that's much more natural for me. And I think that can be incredibly helpful as well in a coaching conversation.
I love the reframing you even just did of my question, where it's not, can you do this or can you not? Will it energize you or won't you? But how?
Mm,
Where are you going to get that energy from?
mm, mm.
So I've got a question here from Robert in the chat. He says, what's the timing of your typical coaching session with 34? Can you do it in an hour?
Gosh, so there's lots of expert opinion, I'm sure, joining us today to comment on that. I would say I don't think you can do 5 in an hour. I mean, I know that Don used to say that it takes a lifetime to master one talent theme. So I don't think it's ever. Well, I suppose there's a couple of different responses here. I don't think this conversation is ever done. So I think as we go through kind of exploring our strengths, there are times when we feel like I've really got this. And then you need to go back and you need to think about different context and, what your objectives are and what it lends to. But I think it also depends massively on the individual that you're working with. So, some people see, it's more comfortable to go faster and to go, others need to go slower and deeper. And again, that sort of that pacing is very much, I think, part of the contracting conversation. So as you're getting to know your client, really thinking about how through your framing of those conversations you're going to get them set up for their very best performance, and that allows you to do your best work as well. I think it's that piece about really getting to know who you're working with.
Really, really important call out there that we frame the coaching agreement right up front and really say, okay, is this, and I think it depends on what are we trying to get out of this. If somebody just wants an expert view of what does their profile say and what does it not, then you should be looking at all 34 all the time, instead of thinking about progressing from first we're going to look at number one, then we're going to look at your supporting themes, and then we're going to look at your lesser themes. In my own coaching, I like to always have all 34 because I think it's more of about let's understand who you are, which also includes who you're not. And it's probably never going to be clean enough to say we're going to go chronologically through these themes. It might be more powerful to look, and this is one of the tactics that we teach, if you remember in that accelerated course, is looking at powerful pairs within someone's 34. So what does it mean? What is the benefit even of having maximizer high and restorative really low? How does that amplify the effect of that maximizer? Right. I had a great conversation yesterday with my friend Mara. We were planning on having dinner together when we're together in Omaha next week. And I said out loud, I said, all right, I know that we have some things that we need to do just the two of us, and I have dangerously high includer for this. So I want you to hold me accountable for not just inviting everybody I see. And she responded with, it's okay, I have includer 34. We can be judicious. And I loved that because it was not looking at her includer 34 or my includer, which is high. Neither of those comments was saying this is a downfall. It was saying, let's be positively vulnerable about where this knack is going to take us. Yeah. And next time I need to be judicious about my guest list, you can bet I'm going to call Mara and say, help me vet this before I jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, you mentioned teams before. What kind of experience or stories or do you have really utilizing all 34 within a team?
Yeah. So I think one of my favorite examples to share is it's a marketing team that I had the opportunity to work with about 18 months ago. And they are people, kind of in the EMEA, alumni will have heard me talking about this probably before, but they are a incredibly energetic group. So they are tremendously fun to be around. They are, really lively. They work hard. They play really hard together as well. And they're just a super team that have really connected with each other. One of the challenges that their team leader had just started to sort of pick up a little scent of was that people were a little bit leaning out. So he very proactively gone out and talked to some of his key sponsors, their internal clients, and really asking them about their expectations of them and how they loved or didn't love to work with them. And overwhelmingly the feedback was you're a great team, we love the ideas that you're coming up with, really good partners, except that there was a definite sort of indication that their energy levels started to fall away once they'd secured sponsorship and buy-in for particular projects. So he asked us to come in and help them to, ensure that they had an ongoing mandate to do their best work with their internal customers. And it was really interesting when we looked at their strengths profile, that they were all about, kind of ideas and, getting that sort of influencing working, so bringing the ideas to life and then finding the people that would press the button and say, yes, go, make this happen. And then they used to kind of lose a little bit of energy. So what we found was that actually their executing talents were less dominant. So they were all about the ideas. They were all about getting people excited, brilliant at doing that and bringing that to life. But the once we had permission to go, they were kind of like, oh, where's the next idea? Can we get excited about that? So delivery was difficult for them. And so what we really did was said to them, okay, let's think about how we, help you. The objective, if you remember, was to continue to have a mandate to do their best work, and actually helping them think about, what happens if you don't deliver on those promises that you've made. And, really looking at their strengths profile and saying, how do you use what you've got in order to achieve that execution that people expect of you, that will then give you permission to carry on doing the stuff that really you love to do and that you have fun with. And a lot of it was around sort of the weight of the promises that they've made, helping them to see that, what risk people had taken in order to sponsor their ideas, and sort of putting helping them put a value around that, and so really sort of leveraging, as I said, the strengths they had as a team to help them be more accountable for that promise that they'd made. And I think actually a big part of that exercise with them was actually just saying, think about what you might lose if you don't do that. So understanding that your energy comes from this bit. What if you didn't get permission to do that next time because you didn't deliver on this bit? So let's think about strategies that will help you to have more of those opportunities to, have those exciting moments. And there were two things that they did. One was really thinking about being more intentional about, how they delivered. They also decided to get an accountability partner in to support them. And actually she was from their compliance team, and she was just in her sweet, happy spot, telling them that they, missed a deadline or they were approaching a deadline. So it was actually a sort of for them a really helpful sort of, let's do everything that we can within this team, because to a certain extent they didn't want to sort of disrupt the balance there. Really super engaged team, but also having this external sort of, accountability partner to help them to sort of just make sure that they were actually doing what they said they were going to do. And exactly to your earlier example, that's somebody who's just helping you mitigate the risk of, it going off where you might be more likely to go.
Wow. So if I'm brand new at this and I'm thinking, wow, that's a great story. I have to say, Anna, right now I'm also thinking the teams I work with can't just jump in and do that. Like
Right.
they don't have sometimes they might not have the language or the understanding or kind of the build up to the point where they've got the kind of trust that needs to be there, or the kind of even, way to navigate that.
Mm.
How do you set them up so that they can get to the point of having those conversations?
Yeah, great question. So I think preparation is absolutely everything for this, because I think if you dive into it, and I know, a lot of our coaches at Alumni say, I've been invited to a team session and, I've got half a day and I've got to get them from A to Z, in 4 hours, what do I do? I think that bit, and again, I'm going to go back to that contracting point. It's around actually, what is it that you're expected to do? What is the outcome? And how do you set yourself up in that conversation in order to make sure that you deliver the very best impact for your clients? And sometimes that's about saying, I don't think that's right. So there is always that sort of push to to do it as quickly and as efficiently and as we possibly can. But I always think it's worth challenging that and saying, okay, well, what is the sustainable development route for the individual or the team, whoever it is you're working with? So for this team, just as an example, what we did was, first of all, had everybody go through CliftonStrengths. We then very deliberately signposted them to the amazing learning content that we have now. So the Your Strengths introduction video or learning module that they can go through. It's 20 minutes. I always recommend that people do that. At the very least, they come ready with questions. So you've got somebody who's started to sort of get a bit of a orientation in the language of strengths and the philosophy. If they've just taken their assessment, they've not read that brilliant report, but they've done that e-learning module, they've at least got some orientation around the language, and maybe they come ready with some questions or observations. What we also then did was took them through individual one-to-one coaching, so to really make sure that they came with that sort of understanding that this is all about setting you up for your best performance. So helping you to show up individually as the best version of you, or at least set you on that journey. And then coming into the room, understanding that we're going to talk about, again, collectively leveraging the uniqueness of the individual team members in order to achieve this team goal in the best, most engaging, fun way possible for all of us. So I do think there are stepping stones. I think, our chances of success, if we just jump in and try and, run a team session without any kind of foundational work is hard. But for this team, it was that. And the other piece that was really important for this team was, post workshop, what accountability are you going to put in place? So, that external partner was one of the strategies. Another strategy was that we had the manager of the team come on the Leading High Performance Teams program and really learn this language. How do you support strengths-based, engagement-focused, performance-oriented conversations with your team going forward, at the individual and team collective level?
I think that's huge, and not something I would have instantly thought of. It's not necessarily come and learn how to be a coach or come to a Clifton Strengths Discovery course, but this is what you care about, perhaps. It's about being a better manager, having better interactions, thinking about shifting from more of the coaching perspective professionally instead of just the mandating boss perspective.
Yeah.
And inviting them to sort of think about the cousin of strengths, the Leading High Performance Teams piece. Yeah. What did you notice in that situation? What do you feel like they took away from it?
So I think the risk with strengths for me is always there is that magnetic pull. So if you're used to having developmental conversations which are all about what's wrong with you, the minute we start talking about what's right with you, it's like, oh my gosh, the sun's suddenly come out and there's hope and it's exciting. And I think people sort of sit a little taller, which is an amazing gift to give. But then it's around, well, what next? And if I'm still having those conversations with my manager, which are not engaging, that's that benefit, or that kind of ray of light is going to dissipate pretty quickly. So I think it's about saying, what can I do, but also how can I, as a manager, how do I support that ongoing? So for me, as I'm thinking about framing solutions for clients, it's always around thinking about what's today and then what's the sustainability plan to make sure that this isn't perceived as a one and done. We always want to kind of have people go back, and again, I think that strengths report, that's a strategy for life. If you keep going back to it, if you keep you learn new stuff every day, and I don't think that's an indulgent luxury. I think that's about how we sustain, our best selves. So I try. My discipline's low, but my focus is high. So I do try and put time in my diary each week to go, okay, what am I going to be intentional about? And I try and encourage people to form that habit. One of the things that I often share, again, I try to find ways of helping sort of make memorable stories. But one of the examples as a mum, I remember teaching my children to brush their teeth was painful, really painful. So I'd sort of teach them, and it would be this is great, this is the benefits, and you can go through all of that, and then as they got a little bit older, they go off independently and brush their teeth, and sometimes they just eat the toothpaste and to Mommy, I've definitely brushed my teeth, and you're going, oh, toothbrush still dry, not sure about that. So it's it was painful in the beginning, but now as they're young adults, I don't even have to remind them. They go into the bathroom, they brush their teeth, they do it. They don't even think about it. It's just that habit that they've kind of created. And I love to think about strengths in that way as we're approaching a task or an outcome or a situation, good, bad, or indifferent. How do I get the best out of this? How do I set myself up for my best performance, whether it's me as an individual contributor or me as a member of that team? So I think it's about that, finding ways to seed the habit. And again, I'm probably stretching the metaphor here, but one of the things I always say is if I don't brush my teeth in the morning, it probably doesn't have a detrimental impact on my health immediately. It's probably not much fun for the person sitting next to me on the train in the morning, but it doesn't kill me overnight. If I don't do it for a week or a month, I'm going to start to feel some ill effects of it pretty quickly. So that's the kind of, for me, it's around sort of small actions or sort of habits that just help us to really get that massive benefit.
I like your take something away to make a point strategy here. And I've heard it come up even how you talk with teams. What is the cost if you don't do this?
Mm,
And very often with strengths, that's where we need to land, because
mm,
it's not so much about helping them get through their day.
mm.
Maybe part of the scene setting that we're trying to do is to paint this picture of, no, it could be that much better, because strengths isn't just, how do you navigate your day? It's really looking at excellence. And the
Yeah.
same reason that we think about that full 34, yes, you might. I think one of the risks oftentimes when we look at 34, especially within a team, is people tend to get a little bit greedy and say, well, I don't have this one in my top 10, but don't worry, it's number 17. I've got this.
Yeah.
When the entire idea of strengths is to put that baggage down and to
Mm.
say, don't carry things that you shouldn't be carrying.
Right.
Carry what you do have dominant better.
Yeah.
And that kind of push toward excellence is really important.
Mm.
Anna, what I've learned from you in just 36 minutes so far that's really going to stick with me is the importance of framing and the
Mm.
importance of really setting up from the very beginning that this is more than a one and done. There are a couple questions here in the chat that I think relate to that framing, and we're not going to go through the detail of how to get to that e-learning module right now. We have an entire session on the tools within Gallup Access and the tools and another session on how to use the tools that you already have within your coaching kit. But when you think about a time that you've really helped somebody frame something up from the start, what is it that you have done, or what questions have you asked that have helped people show up ready to see this as more of a one and done, more than a one and done?
Sure. Um, So I think I feel like I want to say something incredibly, unique, and maybe that's the competition maximizer kind of coming out. But honestly, I think there is nothing so powerful as just fantastic questions. Get really curious about what they need to achieve, and just keep asking questions until you feel you have really real clarity around that. Because I think, in the same way as we would be or we would recommend being really intentional about, understanding how we want to work together, what is it that we want to achieve together, I think is super, super important to pin down. So I think you can, instinctively, as to my point earlier, there is that magnetic pull to exploring strengths. People are really curious about knowing what's right about them. And it's, sadly, it's still unusual that the majority of people probably don't get that conversation often enough. So I think when they do, it's very easy to kind of just slide into a very natural conversation about that. And what I think it's really helpful to try and do is to just kind of pause a little bit and think very specifically about what's the outcome we want to achieve. And just I think it comes very naturally to a lot of coaches, just asking great questions that help us get to know who the individual is. And then, I think for me as well, what that also allows me to do is think about, how I'm going to structure a solution. So I have this amazing client who just surprises me, and I learn so much every time we talk. But she's got, for example, her business is really about helping high net worth individuals kind of invest their money. So a pretty important emotional subject. But what she often gets is literally just a sheet of paper with their details on them and their kind of attitude attitude to risk and so on. And so what she does is she gets on a call with them, and she asks them about some of those things, and trying to get a little bit more insight in them into their views and so on, and the outcomes that they want to achieve financially. What she also does is says, hey, I'm a CliftonStrengths coach. I would love you to read my report, Positive Vulnerability, learn more about me. This is how I love to work. This is what's important. This is what I need to be a great partner for you. And then she invites them to take CliftonStrengths, and they share. And so based on that, what she can then do is help them help to understand how they like to even just receive information. So she's customizing how she serves her customers through that lens of strengths. Now, typically, these would be people that she never meets. She would have a conversation or an email exchange, and she's created relationships super important for her. She's created a mechanism to allow her to frame how she gives them this great investment advice. And it feels to me like a big coaching flavor around that, in the way that she's using that. So I think there's, that's just an example that always sticks with me about how she got so much value out of exploring her own strengths and knowing herself better. She can't help but invite other people to go on that journey.
It's a great reminder to individualize. There was a question here in the chat of what do you do with people who are expected to participate but really show no interest? And I think if we're not individualizing, then they're not going, there's no guarantee they're going to be interested in what's generic and aimed at the entire team. Kind of like an email to your entire team is like an email to no one. If you fall into this trap of just being a facilitator who's going to show them strengths, it's very different than showing up with the coaching nature of saying, what's going to speak to you? How are you going to make this a meaningful experience? And there's a question from Anna in the chat of give us some examples of questions. I can tell you, I have a coach who asked me during that framing the coaching agreement part of the conversation, hey, what is going to make this great for you? And what would you leave me if I did? Like, what would you absolutely hate? And I think we never spend enough time on that first part of individualizing up front, being able to say, how are you going to navigate all 34? What is this going to bring up for you? What kinds of things do you want to make sure we leave with? And I think it's just, we can never do enough of making sure that we're on the same page from the very beginning.
Absolutely.
That hopefully, there was another question here of what do you do afterwards? Hopefully that informs where you're going and where you're going to take it and how you're going to follow up with them.
I think often just picking up on that question about reservations, what if somebody doesn't especially want to be there? I often think that's explained by how they're invited. So I think we can do a really good job of helping the communications before we get into any coaching conversation around what you can expect. Because sometimes I find that reservation is because people don't really know what's going to happen in the room. So they might have been through some other coaching or developmental, process where they felt uncomfortable, or they weren't sure whether it was, a kind of cloaked deselection process or, something like that. So they might have had a previous experience. So context matters again, just helping them to understand exactly what this is all about, the transparency actually of strengths, and that they can ask as many questions as they need to make them feel comfortable as they participate.
This might get back to your idea of positive vulnerability, but how do you keep somebody from feeling completely exposed? There's some safety in top 5 where there's a mystery. Nobody knows. We used to even be able to say, if you're worried about something that isn't in your top 5, don't worry. It might be at number 6.
Yeah.
But when you've got the full 34, it's all there.
So I think it's all this. I think it's about reasserting that there's no right or wrong answers. Right. So we're not saying, with strengths that, if you don't have strategic in your top 5, you cannot be an effective leader. I mean, we wrote a great book about this, right? The strengths-based leadership book, again, really great book to sort of refresh and reread. I think it's that piece around saying this is about how you deliver your best performance. So, if I don't have something in my top 5, it's like that exercise we do on the ASC program about, love, crazy, envy. I love that one. because there are certain things you think, oh gosh, I wish I was a bit more, like that, or
Yeah.
that seems like a really smart theme to have. I wish I had that, but it doesn't mean that we can't do that. So not having those strategic thinking talents doesn't mean that you can't be strategic. It's like, how do you do that? How do you do that well for you? So I think it's about sort of reiterating that often, that can be really helpful. And Maika, I don't know if this is one of those my opportunity to kind of give you my shopping bag analogy here, but
Yes,
one of
yes,
the
bring it on. Yes.
one of the things I always talk about is, when I think about my strengths themes, I think about them like kind of my shopping trolley when I'm going to do the weekly, sort of grocery shop. And there are certain things I throw in my basket every single week. I could go around the supermarket blindfolded and they would always be in there. So they're kind of my eggs, butter, cheese, milk, those kind of things, and cornflakes. And then I think about other things that I sort of put into my basket that I have in the cupboard, but I don't use them necessarily all the time. And then I have some things in my basket that I use really infrequently, but they're still there. And if I need to draw on them, the ingredients are in the cupboard, but it's unlikely that I'm going to draw on them very often. So the analogy that I often talk about with that is that that there can be some really sort of unique ingredients in my cupboard that I've used once or twice in a recipe, but I don't like Chinese 5-spice. I don't put it on my cornflakes in the morning, but I might need it occasionally. So it's kind of there, but less frequently used and probably recommended in my breakfast repertoire. So.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And it might be important to know, where did how many times have I bought an additional entire canister of bay leaves and I really only needed one, but I wasn't aware of where I had put it.
Yes,
so it's
absolutely.
it's not necessarily saying you need to know this and lean into it and change it, but it is, you need to know this and you need to know how it's going to affect other people. I'll do that when I'm coaching leaders very often. I'll say, now the reason we're looking at all 34 is not so that you can invest in these ones that are lower to make them higher, because no one's ever going to know. Like this isn't something that would actually matter. It's because you need to know how you're going to connect with others, and perhaps the power of having some of these not dominant. That can be a powerful thing.
Yeah. And I think on that one, it's also that bit about, don't make people guess. Don't make people guess what you don't love to do. It's, that the best of us exercise. I love doing that. It's this piece around, here's how you set me up for success and vice versa. But don't make me guess that, because I'm really bad at guessing. So give me this language framework in its entirety to help me do that well.
Oh, that's huge. Don't make me guess. We have this information. Let's have the power of knowing. There's I think a cool question here from Jim. He says, how do we differentiate between achieving an outcome using a different talent theme? So what we talked about previously of, hey, I don't have this high. What do I have high? How do I get there? What's the difference between that and knowing that this is a non-talent that I need to manage? What would you say, Anna?
So I think a non-talent that I need to manage can often need a similar strategy to a very intense talent that I need to manage. So I think you can apply similar kind of strategies to exploring how you can manage or develop that in a positive way for you, depending on which end of the spectrum. So, we always talk about, our talents that are raw and potentially very powerful, but we kind of haven't put arms around how to use those. So that investing in talent to turn it into strength. I think you can apply a lot of the same sort of principles about exploring non-talents that you need to manage with the same intentionality. Does that make sense?
It does. And, I was thinking it, but you said it so much better. Your maximizer communication is kind of blowing me away today. You know what? I think it's also, let's let go of the instant assumption that if it's a non-talent, you have to manage it. There might be, back to my story with Mara, she in turn asked me, Maika, what's your number 34? And I said, I don't know. And she then she wrote back and we're texting. She texted right back and said, best answer ever. I did then look it up, and I looked at my bottom 5 or 6 and sent them all back to her. And
Mm,
she was able to summarize, hey, here's what having those low might sound like.
mm,
But it wasn't this. I think it's really important to realize when you're looking at all 34, you are not looking at 34 competencies
mm,
that if you could master, you would be great.
mm, mm,
These are not outcomes. They're patterns of behavior. And just like your patterns of behavior that you have really, really naturally can be your best strength and can be what you trip over,
mm,
those patterns of non-talent could also be what you trip over.
mhm.
But it's not an instant assumption that we have to manage it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you can have intermittent calls to action around non-talents as well. So there are some things that, I know if I have a particular objective that I need to achieve, or I have a particular sort of outcome challenge, whatever it happens to be, there are certain partners that I will just pull in for certain things. I just know that's my fastest route. That's my cheat sheet for getting to an outcome. So it can be in this, it can differ again to context based on the need in that moment, how deliberate you need to be about managing around those as well, I think.
I think both of them have to have an element that's outside of yourself in order to even have the conversation. Otherwise, who cares? It has to be, what is it we're really trying to accomplish? And I think that's one of the first pieces when we come back to that idea of framing. That's one of the pieces that I do a lot of work with when I'm working with a team is, why am I here? Even if the goal is just we want to get to know each other better, we need to state that and have a way to determine whether we've gotten there or we haven't. And so that idea for an individual about, am I trying to manage a non-talent or use a talent I don't have? None of that, all of that is all in our head. Really what we need to think about is what happens outside of ourselves. So as you mentioned, Anna, if I'm really turned on by thinking about other people, what difference is that going to make for someone else? Maybe what is it that I'd like to be better at? How could I be more efficient? What does improved performance look like? That's going to inform the conversation in a much more practical way. And if we get lost in just evaluating somebody's talent profile, we're speaking a language that they don't speak the other 23 hours of their day. And you've already lost the sustainability effort there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's so many questions, Anna. I do want to get specifically to these questions, but you should know that this chat room is, first of all, fantastic human beings from all over the globe who are really excited about what you're saying. They all, like me, wish we could speak with your maximize your communication ability here. You're getting quoted and turned into sort of boilerplate statements here in the chat. It sounds like, I'm just going to scroll through these questions a little bit and see what I'm missing. Recent studies, Robert says, indicate stories and illustrations increase memory retention by a factor of over 21. That's fantastic. I'm not finding any other questions that haven't been asked except for questions about this, the learning series so far. So I'm going to give the last word to you, Anna. When you think back to, narrowing our focus back to thinking about 34 versus just top 5, what is it that you hope our coaches around the world really keep in mind when they're using full 34?
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and say something like this. I think we want to give people, voice to be permission for who they are, in all of its uniqueness and messiness and humanness. I love the idea that we are encouraging people to to be really transparent about communicating and sharing the things that they love to do, as well as the things that they perhaps not so much. But I think I feel like this might be a soapbox moment, so forgive me for being indulgent here. I feel like strengths foundationally is about respect. It's about allowing people to be who they are and respecting them for it. And I think imagine a world if that has a lot of resonance for me with my belief. I think about the experiences that we all might have had differently if we've been introduced to strengths a lot longer. So I think for me it's about the foundations of giving people permission to be all that they are, the very best of themselves, and also permission to be who they're not. And I think increasingly, if we can help people kind of explore that earlier on in their life, I like to think that we become more tolerant, more inclusive, more patient. My children will be sniggering in the background as I say that, but I think all of those things. I hope that through the conversations that we have, we just help people to sort of open up this Pandora's box, and change the view that we all see. And I think, on that one, once you've done strengths and once you've seen people and yourself through this lens of strengths, I think it's really hard to put that lid back down. Hope's out there. Let's go get it.
Thank you, Anna. That was absolutely brilliant, as I knew it would be. But what I'm reminded of every time I meet you and interact with you is just that when you believe in something to your core, it never feels like something extra. And I know I've known you through the lens of being a mom, being a busy working mom, being all over the world and thinking about how you're going to make this work. And you are absolutely in your sweet spot. I've never known you to feel like what you were carrying was heavy. I know that it's a lot to manage everything that you do, but you do it so brilliantly. And I just thank you for all the hard stuff that we don't see. And thank you for just being really a brilliant light, and the voice that you bring to strengths, and the way that you've been able to reframe things or frame things in a new way, or even just remind us of things that we need to know. This is everything we talk about when we think about why be certified. It is because you get to be in the presence of people who know that this is true to their core and who have practiced on purpose getting it out of their core and into the world. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this half as much as I did, then you've had a great morning. Speaking of transparency, which Anna just did, I also want to thank you for your forgiveness as I navigated the sun blinding me. This is what we're learning is apparently at my morning time. It's not the ideal time to sit in this exact space. So hopefully by Thursday, I'll have found some better curtains. It was really great to have Anna with us. I do want to cover a few things before you hop off. So hopefully you've allowed yourself this entire hour. I will say you should also think about adding some debrief time for yourself. Don't expect your brain just to take all of this and then be able to turn it into a practice. If it's not 20 minutes right after this, if it's not a walk or something physical, then think about coming back next week and really setting some dedicated time to what have I learned? What am I going to do with that? I think it's so important just to intentionally make sense of this. Anna asks, what's the hashtag? I don't know that we have one, mostly because we were afraid of creating a little too much FOMO out in the world, but feel free to come up with your own hashtag here in the chat, and I'll use whatever you all decide to use. We do want to make sure that you've downloaded that participant guide. You should have seen the links to that several times. My colleagues who are under the pseudonym CliftonStrengths in the chat, we're dropping that in there. It's also in the Eventbrite link. Jim Collison is the word on the hashtag, and he says hashtag 2020 learning series. Fantastic. Sounds great to me. We're excited to have you back. Again, we've got 3 sessions today. And by today, I mean US time. If you're in the UK like Anna, one of them is about 1 a.m. Tomorrow. But there are 3 today within this 24-hour block. And this was our kickoff session. This was number 1. So again, thanks to Anna for her courage in doing that. We will have another session coming up called Ask Asplund and Austin Anything. And that's where we really get get nitty gritty, and we've taken a couple of your questions that you shared in our Certified Coaches Facebook page. We're really diving into the data and the detail of the instrument. I would also say don't just come with your own questions. Think about your toughest client and what they would ask you. This is a fantastic space to ask those questions. After that, the third session for today is going to be all about Gallup Access. And it's not just a sales pitch for Gallup Access. It's really going to hopefully challenge you to think about how can you be more present in the art of coaching and perhaps automate some of those other things that your clients need to think about. So that's also where you'll find a lot of your questions from today about that e-learning module or about other things that you could be using to frame up a really educational conversation so your clients come ready with questions and free you up to do more coaching. We do have a couple other pieces to talk about, and that is the continuing education credits. So if you are attending live, you have just earned yourself one CCE core competency hour. That is as it relates to ICF. If you're joining on demand, thank you for listening. It still counts as an hour. It's just a different type of an hour. It's called a resource development hour. If you need to request professional development hours, you can send an email to the evaluation in your inbox on January 31st. That's why we ask that you have registered for the series so we can really stay in contact with you. Basically, at the end of the series, you'll receive an evaluation, and that's your opportunity to indicate which sessions you attended live. If you need anything else along those lines, you can always email CEU@gallup.com, and that will take care of anything that you need in terms of professional credits. Thanks so much for joining. I think that will do it for today's session. Let's use the hashtag, as Jim said, 2020 Learning Series, and stay connected. Please go out, do something physical, make sense of your day, and enjoy the rest of the difference that you're continuing to make around the world.